Good evening and welcome to tonight's lecture, the third in our series for 2026. And as always, tonight's session is co-hosted by ourselves, the Royal Society of New Zealand Wellington branch, and our parent body, the Royal Society of Capital Kiwi. And once again, it's a beautiful Ananui lecture theatre we get to enjoy here tonight. Now, I guess the burning issue for all of you is just who is Parker Jones? Well, he's a gentleman confidentially to my left, and he's the guy who's going to be talking about GIS. So, anyway, Parker was raised and worked on his grandparents' Angus beef and cropping farm in Gloucester, Virginia.
I'm not a farmer now.
You're not a farmer now. In 1976, he graduated from Methodist University in North Carolina with a Bachelor of Administration with the intent of continuing to become a chartered accountant. However, he was attracted by Burroughs Corporation to become an IT salesperson of accounting solutions. He emigrated to New Zealand in 1983 and joined, now how do you pronounce that? Prime or PR1? Prime. It's got a one in the middle there instead of an I, so it's more very confusing. So Prime Computers, now known as Eagle Technology Limited, as an account manager until he retired 29 years later. Parker has been a volunteer tracker for 22 years and continues to serve on both the GIS in Conservation and MIRO committees. MIRO.
Mainland Island Restoration Organization,
MIRO. And the MIRO, he coordinates the protection and study of the endangered Wellington region banded dotterel population, assists the Little Blue Penguin Project, and manages the Parangahau Lakes volunteer trapping program. So listen, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Parker Jones. Parker, we may have questions from the audience as you go, okay with a few but not too many, and we'll park the majority of them towards the end, or after your lecture.
More questions unless I talk?
Yes, indeed. And indeed, we're going to commute at exactly 7. So I'm going to be brutal. If people are talking, I'm going to say, that's it, off you go. That's 7 o'clock. Fair enough? Thank you, Parker.
Thanks, David. So as David says, the prime is the logo. So you can see there's a, well, in fact, it's not even there. It's a little wall. So this is a system that we were looking at in 1983. Down at the bottom right, you can see the removable 300 megabyte disk drives. You can see the tape drives that were running. These systems, of course, predates everything in terms of the greater web and so forth. This computer could run about 255 concurrent users, so we had them in places like UDC Finance, Math, Bothworks, and so forth. In fact, Bothworks was the first company in New Zealand that actually connected 5. Bothworks was a freezing works, Meatworks, which has been now bought by others. But they were the first one communicating between machines, between Masterton and so forth, where they had the freezing works. And Math was the second. So Prime, they're using PrimeNet, which was an X25, which is one of the initial ways to communicate between different computer systems. So quite a swept up system. We were mainly selling COBOL-based applications of preferred knowledge. So here I am, my first day. Haven't changed a bit, 1983. I said, what the hell have I done? I had 6 years at Burroughs Corp. I was on my way up to head office in Detroit, Michigan. And I read about the Norfolk Track, and I said, oh, let's go try and see what's happening in New Zealand. And that was in July, and then 2 months later I was working for Eagle and our Prime Computers at the time. And I picked Prime because I was working for a large corporate. I mean, Burroughs Corp was the number 2 in the world computer company. And to do anything, you had to go all the way through head office so forth to get anything done. Whereas with Prime Computers, which is owned by the Eagle family, you could call Trevor up at any time. Trevor was an IBM salesman, so he exactly knew what we needed in terms of sales and what we're doing out there. And then when he started the company, very much entrepreneurial. And of course, a typical salesman standing around while everybody else does the work. So we brought in a lot of software into New Zealand. So people like Ellie Martins with Retail Plus, MMC, we put into manufacturing versus stainless. IBA is a hospital bed accounting, so we had that at Capital Coast Health and up at Taranaki. So I was mainly working in that area of financials, debit, credits, how boring, right? And then we also had the agency of Autodesk, the AutoCAD products, and computer vision. Then I had a call from a Dr. Cliff Bacon. Now you might recognize that name. He introduced himself as the chair, or the head of the survey school down at Otago University. And he said, you guys represent Prime. I said, yeah, we got the sole agency for Prime in New Zealand. He said, ESRI's development program. I said, what's an ESRI? He said, it's a GIS. And I said, what's a GIS? So this was 1986 down in Christchurch when we first heard about it. And then, ironically, within a week, I had another person, Headley Evans, who was a landscape architect, renting the same building I was in Christchurch. He came down and said, "You sell primes?" I said, "Yeah, we sell primes." He said, "ESRI developed." I said, "That's a Geographic Information System." So we actually then contacted, we've got a group within Eagle at the time, they're called Number One Software. What they did was they negotiated for us to become the sole agents for these different software applications. So back in 1986, 87, we became the sole application provider for the ESRI product. So I did a bit of digging. So this is Dr. Roger Tomlinson on the left. He actually coined the word Geographic Information Systems. So he came up with the idea of how that works. The other person is Jack Dangerman, who is the owner of ESRI. This is a current picture of Jack. And what I found was, in terms of what is a GIS, so this is the very first type of graphic that we use. So you can see at the bottom represents the real world, and then each has a layer of different information that represents a geographical piece of information. And then here's your switch hot AI version of a GIS. Yeah, that's what's called architectural engineering and systems. Whenever you go to my first ESRI conference was attended in Palm Springs, and there was only like 800 people there, whereas now there's 20,000 attendees in San Diego. They've actually outgrown. And what Jack Dangerman would do is he would get everybody in the audience to turn around to the person behind him and introduce themselves. So I'd like you to just introduce yourself to somebody you don't know. Just say a quick word about what you do or anything you want about yourself. And what happened was, I did that. When I turned around, it was actually Roger Tomlinson sitting behind me. So I was able to talk to him. We caught up for a few coffees and teas, and it was fantastic. So we kept in touch until he passed away. So just have a quick, with people you don't know, just say, here I am, I do this, how are you? I hope we made a good connection.
Specialised in rural distilling.
Okay, now that you've met the other people, once we finish at 6:30 sharp, at 6:30 sharp, you can hopefully connect. So it's a great way to connection, and that's what GIS is all about, is connecting with people. So when a GISer looks at a picture like this, they don't see this. This is what they see. They see that pretty much GIS touches everything. So whether it's aeronautical charts, Dave Pimblad with EGL did all the aeronautical charts for New Zealand's airplane, marine. If you guys live anywhere inside the Wellington region and you look at your house online, it's all the ESRI stack. So Greater Wellington, Hutt City, Upper Hutt, so forth, all have the same software. And so it runs the query. So apologies about your rates rising, but I can't do anything about that. Then in 1995, this was the local authorities used to have a group get together up at the Iraqi, which is quite a bit of fun. And the cost of the systems were quite high. So if you wanted to buy a station to run the ESRI product, the ArcInfo product, you're paying about $50,000 back then, so that's about $150,000 in today's terms. Plus you add an ArcInfo, and you're paying another $50,000. So you're paying about $300,000 of current dollars just to buy one station of ArcInfo back in these days. The other issue was data costs. So when we first came into it, if you wanted to buy any of the data, so like your core records, so this is the survey data. So Dosley used to sell their New Zealand parcels at $1 per urban. So your house, if I wanted to buy your data from the house, I'd pay $1 for that. And if I wanted a rural area, it's $4. Now, of course, multiply that times 3. So let's say I'm a 300,000 population city. I'm paying 300,000 for just the urban, plus I've got maybe a few others. So you're paying 400,000 or 500,000. Again, multiply that times 3 because that's the inflation. So you're looking at about over $1 million to buy that base data. And the only people that I know that actually did buy that in New Zealand was Telecom. So of course, Telecom, we did all of the communication stuff. They're the only ones who could afford to purchase that amount. Then in 1996, which you would know, Brett, Lynn State as the government department, Terralink became the commercial side of the entity. And of course, they had to land a line. So pretty much every solicitor, barrister, whoever does a transfer of title has map objects from ESRI on their PCs at their offices, right? So we were a small part of the project. It was $140 million, and most of that was actually taking the old survey books and capturing all the survey data, right? So right now, who can we sell to? We could sell to people like town planners, we could sell to DSIR, and we could sell to universities, because universities had a really low cost. So Jack was quite good in terms of getting software into universities, because that's your future buyers, right? Then we did a lot of work with the different vendors, so Small World, Genamap, MapInfo, and so forth. We all got together and put a lot of pressure onto the government. Even Jack Dangerman came down to New Zealand to meet with the government. I think it was Morris Williamson was in charge. And we really pushed to get the data out for cost of supply. So instead of having to pay that humongous price, it would only be like $2,000 to get Niwa's fresh water. So it was a cost to actually supply it out to. And Trevor Eagle was trying to get rid of the product. He said, we're not making any money in this product. It's costing us money. Let's get rid of it. And we said, if you get that data supply down, cost down, this product will take off, which of course it did. And right now, this product's actually running pretty much Eagle Technology Group. And then now, of course, you've got cloud services. Everybody makes it for granted that you can look at a topo map or you can look at the CRS data. It's all there for free now, which is great. Then with the initial work I was with, it was DSIR days before they broke apart. So Dr. Udi Shankar down in Christchurch, he did the fresh waters, streams, and I think it was $2,000 to cut you a CD of that area. We had the Land Care LCDB, Land Coverage Database, so that was Land Care Research. And this system can be used, I can tell you a couple areas where it was used. So we had a person who was looking for manuka, for honey. And with the Land Coverage Database, it's got like 290 different categories of soil type, soil slope, rainfall, sunshine hour, so forth, so on. So they looked at where Pinot could grow, and they actually came up with Central Otago. Let's put some Pinot down there, just because of the LCDB. And also the problem with the honey portion was that the land coverage, the imagery that was being done by Dr. Craig Trotter, couldn't tell the difference between Canuka and Manuka. So we could tell them where the Manuka was, but not where the actual, so they would have to go out and then search for the Manuka to get the honey and put the hives out there. It was also used by Doc with the high country station leases when Doc took over the land, and when Doc wanted they basically inherited a whole bunch of mountains, right? But what they wanted was tussock land and so forth, so they would use the LCDB to negotiate with farmers. Farmers would get the ownership, but they would want these pieces of land, not necessarily the mountaintops. So LCDB was quite an important data set. This is a 10-meter project. This is the GNS QMAP project that was put through. And then this system, of course, is all the hazards underneath the ground for any kind of earthquake type hazards, soil slopes, soil slips, that kind of stuff. So this is what was happening while that data cost was so high. So a lot of work was being done within the DSIR and, of course, with the different groups when they split apart. It was really a shame for me to see, because I was working with like marine geologists and they got split. So you had some went to GNS, some went to NEWA, you had Met Service and NEWA people doing the same thing. It was kind of confusing when they broke apart. The really sad part was the public good funding disappeared. And it was a shame, because a lot of these scientists didn't know how to apply for funding. They had to become salespeople to actually go out and get funding and so forth. So it's kind of a shame, I thought, that this happened. And then, of course, NEWA bathymetry. I don't know if you know, but on the left side here is the UN Law of the Sea. So it's very simple, once NEWA did all the mapping, to calculate the new Law of the Sea. And what it's given us is the territory of, I think we were the #2 country in the world to actually get approved for the UN Law of the Sea. And that, of course, increased our sufficient areas by a dramatic amount. And then on the right here, this map here of the ocean floor, that won a top cartography award for it's just basically such a beautiful picture, depicting the New Zealand systems. One of the first applications of the Department of Conservation, there were 3 people at DOC, Ross Bicker, Norm Thornley, and Terry Conahan, that really grabbed the idea of how GIS helps the Department of Conservation. And one of the first things Ross did was he had the bathymetry information, obviously, from NEWA, and they put these devices on the hooker sea lines, because they were feeding down in the squid areas. And this was to really try to see what an implication, how far did they dive, how far did they go underwater, and because you got the squid fishing out there with these big nets, and we're going to get these hooker sea lines. So they had a system where Some of the seals had devices actually hooked to them, which would then float up, which gave us the depth of how far they were going to the Argus. The Argus satellite's still in use, but so this is quite old technology. There's a lot newer technology now, but this is one of the first areas where DOC started using the technology. Then, of course, we did the big DOC sale. Top left is just your land coverage database. Top right is their pest area. And this is the Hurunui. This is the first mainland island in New Zealand. Hurunui is outside of Henry Springs. And if you look at the bottom two, on the left, they're doing possum control on the bottom part of it. So you can see that the number of possums are highly red. This is this. So this is where the possums are. You've got a big ridge here. And then where they're doing controls, there's no possums. But what's happening with the weeds, because there's possums, the weeds are down where they are. And of course, the weeds are increasing here. So some of the big paybacks for DOC, DOC didn't know who the neighbors were. So we could easily buffer their neighbors over the CRS, the Core Record System data set. They've got a fire department that has to fight fires within a kilometer of their land. There was a fire that started in North Canterbury. It cost DOC about $300,000 to fight it. They could actually prove that that fire started off their territory, so they could build, unfortunately, North Canterbury Council. But it was good for DOC. So it saved quite a bit of money. So it had some really quick, very quick return for Department of Conservation. Now this picture is upsetting to me, and you may not know why. So the bottom left, you've got Director General Hugh Logan of the Department of Conservation. On the right, you've got Craig Ewell, who was the acting CEO at the time. On the top left, you've got Alan Evans, who was the CIO of the Department of Conservation. And you've got Bugalugs on the right. And so this was sent out to the intranet, so just internal DOC, and saying if you have any questions, just respond to this email address. They had 3 anonymous questions saying, who's the cute one sitting next to the DG? Yeah. So that made my ego go real. So we'll get rid of that one. And I have a really good affinity with Niwa and Kevin McCall and so forth. I mean, they do some beautiful maps. And there's a beautiful map of the Kaikoura which shows the big trench. It shows where the squid are so that all the whales, that's why the whales love staying there, so they can see that. So, but it just tells a beautiful picture in this case. So this is the Chatabrise where the orange roughy was. They were looking at controlling the orange roughy control. And I think that it's really like a good artwork to my mind. Some of the applications we put in, so Ravensdown was the first. We couldn't sell the software to Bladis. We had a 3-year contract with Ravensdown, so we could only do with them. So they could do precision putting down of fertilizer. They would know by soil type, soil slope, this area here needed more fertilizer. This area over here didn't, needed less fertilizer. So it was actually helping control the nitrates going into the ground. Then, I don't know if you remember, but 2005, so this is the mass incursion response system, mainly built for foot and mouth. And in 2005, we just released this to production. And there was a letter that came in saying we just released foot and mouth on Waiheke Island. I don't think you remember that. So, of course, the New Zealand dollar started going boom. We put a team up in NCDI, National Center for Disease Investigation, at Upper Hutt. And also we had a guy up in a chopper on a beautiful sunny day, GPSing places where Bait the pig was. We had the farmers, but we didn't know some of the lifestyle blocks. And this guy was getting airsick flying over Waiheke on a beautiful sunny day. But we had, and what the system does, it basically prints out a visit map, which is given to a vet. And the vet then goes out, knows who's on the land, who's managing the land, what's on the land. Unfortunately, at that time, NAIT, the National Animal Identification Tracing System, the farmers thought this was Big Brother, so a lot of them didn't sign up to it. After MBOVIS, now it's mandatory that they've got to be a member of NAIT, right? So for 2 weeks, and then also foot and mouth can travel on feet, on tires, but also can go in the air for about 50 kilometers. So as part of the IRS, we had a NIWA plume analysis, so they were subcontracted to NIWA to show it. They actually showed a windfall going from Waiheke Island south to some land territory, so we had to do those inspections also. Now, foot and mouth takes 2 weeks to show up. It never showed up, and of course it was a hoax. For some reason, somebody released. It cost New Zealand about $2 million to do this process. But when those kind of things happen, it's just all hands into it to try to help. So here this is a map application. So this was quite an interesting one because the government wanted to have land use carbon, or sorry, the ETS energy trading scheme, and the to be in place. This is the carbon trading, carbon accounting systems. And what we did was we developed very quickly a system where we could overlay both imagery and topographic maps. And then a farmer could draw a polygon around that forest, say that this is Pinus radiatus, it's 20 years old, and we pop back with an estimate of the carbon credits that farmer would get for that land. So this is the way that the farmers initially got very quickly what they could get out of this carbon trading scheme. Then what would happen is that people from that then go out and check those farms, obviously, to make sure that it was correct in terms of the carbon credits. So this system's still running as the land use carbon accounting system in the energy trading schemes. And then one was the parliamentary Jan Pierce. So she was doing the 1080. She was quite anti-1080. And this just shows you a map of Dock Estate with the light green, and the dark green is where 1080 has been used. And in the end, she basically recommended to the government that we should continue to use 1080 to help control pests and so forth. And what I was quite pleased at was when I was working with Inland Revenue, we had a lot of work in IR. We did the systems that acted between the mainframes and the PCs, because it took, in fact, IR just replaced their systems for $1.1 billion. And it went very well because it didn't hit the press, so they did a good job of installing it. And Tony Lester was the CIO there. And we sold all of government Microsoft licensing to Inland Revenue, so it went to all the different government departments. So he moved to the CIO over to Linz, and as CIO there, he came to me and said, listen, we're part of this natural resource sector, which includes DOC, MAF, MFE, MED at the time, and of course Linz. So we were able to save about $300,000 a year in licensing by merging all these groups together. What would happen is, like the first year, Linz was acting as the person that we would deal with. So any questions that came through, because these people all, like Doc had a team of 38 people in the GIS unit. So any questions that came through that needed support would go through one entity, and then we deal with that one entity. So it saved us quite a bit of time. Instead of dealing with all the different people within these, but again, it saved them quite a bit of funding. And who remembers putting right? It's putting right that counts. Anybody remember Neil Martin? So Neil Martin was the first mail order person in New Zealand. And ironically, what we did for him here was, because it was like Amazon started, this is way back when, and it cost a lot of money to ship out all the boxes that were being sold off of the system. We were sitting there, the day they actually started this mail order system, we were sitting in a room and there was these lights here, about 12 phone operators, and the lights, as soon as Neil was on the TV, the phone started ringing. I said, wow, this is great, the money's coming in. But what happened was, New Zealand Post, if you gave the postcode for delivery of these boxes, you saved heaps of money. So by us geolocating postcodes to the addresses that they were shipping these posts to, saved them tens of thousands each year just in shipping costs. Unfortunately, TVNZ, in their wisdom, said, we don't want your type of advertising. So they shut them down. And now, of course, we've got 24-hour TV shows just doing these bloody ads. But yeah, so Ellie Martin is very, very intelligent operators. I really enjoyed working with them. Unfortunately, they sold it to the city. In some cases, some of the places we work with, it actually drives the business. So Walking Access Commission was a small piece of business for us, but John Key was the owner of this project because he wanted to open, I don't know if you remember, but he got together with labor and they opened up all the bicycle lanes. They came up with the ideas of bicycle lanes, which one, created a lot of jobs, and two, brought tourism. So he wanted to open up the areas. So what the Walking Access Commission, by the way, it's still going, so if you guys want to have access to stuff, it's a great system, a great mapping system you can download to your phone. What they did was we were able to take all of what's called marginal strips. So if the stream's so wide, you've got legal access along the side of that stream, right? And also there's lots, I think there's 50,000 kilometers of paper roads that have never been developed. So this system basically pulled up all the paper roads and all the marginal strips. And then people at the Walking Access Commission would go to those sites and say, well, listen, we know there's a paper road here, but if you don't want the tracks to go through here, we can move them over here. And then Walking Access would help with the signage and so forth. So it really drove that business of what they were doing. I really wanted to highlight Kim Olivia in this one. So Kim, highly technical, highly skilled GISer. And he's the first person who georeferenced the topo and the aerial imagery for vector-based maps, which is what you get with Google. I mean, this is 20 years before Google, right? And so that gave us a really good data set for us to be able to push over. But he also, I don't know if you know, but the Aotearoa walkway actually gave us the escarpment track. So he's on the committee. They get about $500,000 a year in funding for the walkway. And of course, Kim's very good. He does all the mapping technology on that. 40% is on dock estates. They do a lot of work with farmers and so forth to get that business through. So I've got to hand it to Kim. He does this all on a voluntary basis, which is great. Another one where the GIS really drives the business was Kiwi 2 Trust. I don't know if you know Tim Park. He's now the manager of the Atari native plants. So Tim was one of the rangers for Kiwi 2 Trust. He was taking topo maps and looking for areas of bush, and then trying to contact the owners of that area to try to, get them to put covenants through. So when I went up to it, they were up on the terrace, and they had 280 maps up on the wall with all these pins. So I go up to the map and said, "Those pins," I moved, "Don't touch those pins." Oh, shit. They didn't know how many hectares they had covered. So because they'd survey the areas, but they didn't have a system to actually tell them how much hectares they had. It was very simple because we had the survey to give them all that information very quickly, so we know exactly how much they got. And there's, of course, a lot more tools nowadays to find areas to help with, and a lot of farmers are now really buying into it anyway, so the whole thing's changed. Another one where it really drives the business is the Animal Health Board, now called Osprey. We put the software in. We just did a small job. We did the original trap catch. And what it is, it's just a model that puts out 10 points in the area they're controlling. On one of those points, it puts a vector out randomly. And on that point, you've got 10. It could be cue cards or some kind of a device to monitor. So what they had to do is to get rid of the bovine tuberculosis, you had to get 4% or less residual trap catch. So if you put out 100 of these devices, and you have 5 chew signs from possums, the contractor could go back out there, right? The other good thing is now they control the NAIT system. So now all of the national animal stuff is controlled by the Osprey group, and all the farmers have to actually put their information in now to involve the situation. The other thing is, it was really pleasing for us to attend with them. They asked us to attend on their behalf because they won the All of New Zealand top award in IT implementations of the system. So we went up there with the Animal Health Board people, or Osprey. Little knowing there was actually Eagle Technology table that was sponsoring the prize. So here we walk up, they said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, we're getting a prize. We're here with Animal Health Board." So, it's good. So those are just some examples of where it's driving the business out there. Now this is Jack Danger and Laura. And Laura and Jack have sole ownership of the ESRI product. It's a $1 billion a year company, 700,000 users. But they are social consciousness, which I really love. They purchased a piece of land for $160 million, 24,000 acres just outside of Santa Barbara. It was going to be developed into thousands of homes, and that's now been designated as a reserve. So it'll never be, it's quite an important area, because if you ever go to that area, it's just so built up. But also like with the earthquake in Christchurch, we actually have family down there. And what happens is the first thing you do is call us up and say, "What do you need? What do you need?" Because they've got a system ready to go on a plane to come down to help with earthquakes. But what we did was we put out the call. So that's the before and that's the after. What the problem was, the ECAMS building down in Canterbury was fine and the bunker was fine, but the building across the street was ready to fall. So they had to go out away from the building. So they actually based themselves at the Art Library. If you know that, down in Canterbury, because the building was safe. So we put out the word saying, "Hey, we need help. We need volunteers to come down and help with this earthquake." And so we had all kinds of volunteers from different companies. And the companies that these people work for said, "Yep, go down there." So we were recording these people as they went. They were doing things like, initially, where are the hazards? If we're going to inspect buildings, what hazards and where are they? What do we need to be aware of? Where do we route people for emergencies? Police, fire, that kind of thing, because a lot of roads were totally closed. Where do they put the toilets, right? Because they had to put toilets up because there's no water. So it was great to see all these people just put their hand up as GIS specialists, to head down there, sitting underneath the stairwell at the Art Center doing this work, and pretty much just sponsored by their companies. And this went on for quite a while. And it was also, we put in a system saying, "Where are those cones? Those bloody road cones." So you could report, you could crowdsource these horrible road cones and come and pick them up. They're not doing anything. So, and Jack, he's really keen on helping in those kind of situations, any kind of disaster. I had a meeting with the people, I've been out of Eagle now for 12, 14 years, but with the flooding and everything, they've got people ready. USAR, LANSAR is deeply involved with this technology now. And there's a team ready to go at Eagle, no charge, just to help out if there's any kind of disasters. Another project that I call what's called a feel-good project, we actually lost money on this, was the New Zealand Archaeology Association, NZAA. Now, I didn't realize the NZAA here is self-funded, it's voluntary. In the States, it's all controlled by government. Whereas here, it's a bunch of volunteers doing work. And so we supplied the software, we supplied the development to actually develop a system, which is still working today, still working. So if you go to the ARC site, you can see these green stars. That's as far as you can see. You can't zoom any further. All you can see is, okay, I've got something here that looks like it's some kind. Now, archaeology is just to do with humans, so it could be World War II emplacements, it could be a midden, or it's just human stuff. And then, but if you have the rights, you can see everything, right? And the big cost for them was they had 50 some odd thousand sites, and it was actually the data capture, getting all this handwritten pictures put into the systems was where the big cost was. And it's great to see that it's still working and still going today. And again, I think we probably lost about 100,000, but we didn't care. It's just part of Jack Dangerman's social engagement. The other thing is we have what's called a First Nation program where a nonprofit like an iwi can get the software at very low cost. And people like Naitahu, so this is Naitahu here with the cultural mapping project, they have both commercial licenses as well as nonprofit licenses. So for their fishing stuff, that's all commercial iffy stuff. But for everything they're doing with culture mapping, that's all about telling their history, about things, where things are, and so forth. Yeah, pretty much no charge. Then Joy, one of our first, from St. Lawrence, one of our first school, GIS in Schools programs. And back in 2001, we had 26 schools. And now we have 400 schools. And it's actually now part of the government's MED, or education department's criteria that GIS has put into those. So Claire Thurlow has done a great job, and nothing's charged. So this is all hosted up in the Amazon Web Services, and they have all kinds of studies they can do. And it's great to see that it's really been, it's growing, the usage is growing within GIS schools. And again, no charge. The thing that I really liked was the ESRI Conservation Program. And, you look back and you think, my gosh, what happened and what I do now with bandage offshore for other stuff. It was really that first call from the bank that put me onto this track. So the ESRI Conservation Program, if you're doing conservation work as a nonprofit, software free, so forth, right? And so I would throw this software while I was still working, because I was $1 million of gross profit quotas to get in. So I would throw the software at sites and say, and they would just struggle with it. There were some exceptions. So Zealandia, we had Bernard Smith. So Zealandia was a mouse proof. So on the left-hand side, that's a mouse model, and showing us the amount of mice. I don't know if you remember this very well. And also what he was tracking was things like ropes. So a lot of if you've ever been into Zealandia, it's quite a steep area. So to do some of these lines, you got to climb ropes, and you got to know how old those ropes are and when you need to replace them. Also, what trees are outside of the fence line that you could fall onto the fences and then bring predators in. And on the right is just a simple buffer from Zealandia saying, if we see certain things like, of course, Kapa, found over in Mount Bruce, but hopefully things like saddleback and so forth. So Bernard, very good, self-instructed, so we put him onto our committee when we first started GIS Conservation. The other person was Scott Samble. He's was with Glenfern Sanctuary up in Great Barrier Island, which is a fenced peninsula. And he was one of the first who did the old trap-to-phone stuff, going back. And he's also a rat person with his dogs. So he's been to most of the islands doing with rat work. And back in those days, he was doing track repeater visibility using the software. So he was doing overlays. So put an antenna here. These devices have to see the antenna to be able to talk to it. So this is where he could put them, and then he would know where he has to put repeaters. Okay. So when I retired, because I would throw the software at these users and they would just struggle and wouldn't do anything with it, I decided to set up a group called GIS Conservation, so GIC. And our software is sponsored by Eagle Technology, who's the, of course, sole owner here. What we offer is no-cost hosted platform. assistance with software grants, so I'll talk about that a bit. So if they become to the point where they need to have the software themselves, they can get it. Access to skilled GIS volunteers, it's amazing. I've got over 100 skilled GISs ready to volunteer. And the problem I've got is we don't have enough conservation sites to put them to. So I've actually got the problem with more volunteers. So if any of you guys will, any things that need help, certainly talk to me about it. And we do the support and resources. We've been going 14 years now as GIC. We've probably helped over 200 groups, I don't know, quite a few. And the groups go from north, so on the left side is Northland, obviously. These are people doing tracking work up in Northland. This is Stewart Island on the right side, the SICRET system is Stewart Island. So we have users all the way from north to south in New Zealand. One of the things we do is what we do, and this is where I do at work, is mind mapping. So we go to talk to people and see what the requirements are and then do the work with them and then come up with solutions for them. So one place we went to was ZIP, Zero Invasive Predators. This is how it's programmed. This is when they first started, looking at pretty basic topo maps. And so I brought Scott Sample down from Glenfern, and we did a brainstorming with ZIP, with Alistair and his team. And it got to the point where they said, listen, we're just going to get GIS. So they hired a full-timer to basically run the GIS. That's it. And it's still being used. They use it for like the Taranaki to make sure that when they drop to 1080, it doesn't look at streams and so forth. So very technical work with it. Some of the original things that he was working on. So these are chew cards. So you put a bit of peanut butter into a core flute, which is like your real estate advertising boards. And if somebody comes and chews it, you can tell by the bite marks who it is or what it is. The devices underneath when they move, they would send a message back saying, hey, I just moved. The devices could tell whether it was wind or an actual chew. So if it was a chew, they'd go and check them. On the right, you can see this is a leg hold trap for a possum. And you can just see the antenna down below. So if that thing falls off, it sends a message back. So these are some of the original systems worked on 12, 15 years ago. And then here you can see the beta copies we worked with. And then, of course, what they are now today. So this, again, so the top left here would be 14 years ago. And that's sending information. So this trap goes, sends a signal, and back out to telemetry. And this is now being used pretty much everywhere. Another place we did, well, this is one of the first places, so this is up in the Hawke's Bay, and it was really working with farmers on private land. Now, a lot of farmers don't trust stock, right? So what we did was we did a brainstorming session with the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, as well as the farmers, as well as the and out of that came the benefit for the farmers to do this work. And the farmers we put out on the devices we put there would be supposed to send messages back to your phone. And the farmers would then go check the traps, or we'd have volunteers go out there. So this is one of the first places in New Zealand where a whole landscape area was done with farming, so on private property. So totally outside of having to work with dog. And some of the earliest ones would be Ark in the Park up in Auckland. So this is looking at rat take. And as you can see with the poison stations, as they go further and further inside the air, there's no rats by the green. So the red outside shows, it's basically showing the amount of the density of rat population going through. And some of the other ones, Brook Sanctuary, they had issues with where we put our fence. There was the Mount Dunn Mountain Biking Club. And of course, their boundary was right on where the clubs. They had to go a lot of work to get through that. And then also, of course, the trapping and so forth. NEIT, they had access issues trying to get to it because it's surrounded by private property. And I'm just talking to the current people at NEIT just for other questions. So they're still using the software, still working with it. It's mainly used for, where I think it was 140 Kiwi had been translocated to Capital Kiwi because they've got an oversupply at NEIT. So it's tracking those people as well as the traps and so forth, so on. And then the very first community engagement was Kelvin Hasty in Crofton Downs. And he had the idea that if we start trapping publicly, in people's houses, we can start to stop the, it's being done on public land, let's do it on private houses. So we did the pretty much 1 to 5 houses in Wellington we were hosting. And on the right, you can see the predator-free Miramar. So we were the original hosting of this. Those have all now moved, of course, to Trap NZ. Then I had Paul Ward contacted me about 2017 with the idea of putting Kiwi into Wellington, which I thought was fantastic. And so we actually put 2 volunteers, one a business analyst, which would capture the requirements, and then Ed Cook, who was a really top developer, volunteered to do the development for Capital Kiwi. And it was things like where do we put our lines, doing a buffer on those lines, what areas are missing, who else, if the blue, if you can see the blue, those are on either Zealandia or on houses, because they want to do the trips, not just what they're doing with the areas outside of it. And then we got quite involved as GIC, because I've been narrow trapping for 22 years. And there were six applications. You had Trap NZ, Dock Walk the Line, Mains Trust, so forth, so on. So we worked with Predator Free New Zealand, and they had a spreadsheet talking about what the different applications were. We also beta tested Trap NZ and Walk the Line, because those are the only two that had handheld in-field applications. And Miro, I stayed out of the decision. Miro actually went with Dock Walk the Line, whereas as you know now, Trap NZ has pretty much taken over all the trapping applications. And something GIC couldn't do. You know, that's a huge system. You need to have support, you need to have finances. They develop things like the pest monitoring and so forth added to the system, paid by Wellington City and so forth. So that's just too big for something like us. Okay, we couldn't do that, but we've assisted with their applications. We put a lot of feedback to Ground Truth, who is the owners of the Trap NZ product, of what they're doing with it. Then some of the other local areas. So this is Newmark, that's an urban Mariah up in Newlands. They have a 20-year planning project, and that was for food, weaving, and medicine. So they had 3 specialists would come in. So what they want to do is put these plants out there, who planted them, where they're planted, what they're for, and when they will be available, and how much we'll get, how many years will we have this supply. So it's really to supply them over 20 years of all the food, medicine, and weaving plants. And the volunteer there is Catriona. It was interesting, she worked for Department of Conservation's GIS department, and Doc gave us her 4 hours a week to do this work, which is great, up at the Mariah. Serge Peters, this is which we have the current holder here, Jeff, of the Wellington Harbor Penguin Project. This was an analysis on Somes Island of the best route to walk to check all the penguin houses. Okay? So it's a best route. Typical use of GIS was the best route to get through there. And Serge also did the places for penguins. Once they came to us for help, we did the places for penguins. And now with our great new Eastbourne shared pathway, we've got 75 new penguin boxes. So I've asked Serge and he's agreed, by the way, Jeff and Dallas, to help us with the GPS and all that kind of stuff. So he's going to develop a little routine. By the way, just the one with the high-impact permit for the penguins to capture the data. I've already got volunteers to check those houses. Now, that's why I put this one up. This is Lucas Moiston. He was based in Palmerston North City, yet he did the work from Mototapo Island, which is up in the Auckland Harbor. And this is a weed control system where you get like the BNZ volunteers will go out and do weeding, right? So they would take their phone, they would download to the phone where they want to go, and they could just walk the phone to where the weeds were. If they saw asparagus, fern, or whatever, they could crowdsource that as they went. And then because there was no coverage out there, as soon as they came back to the office, it was all brought back into the system. So it would just automatically go, so the controllers would know what they did, where they did it, and so forth. Good way to control, I guess, trained type volunteers. And then one that's dear to my heart, Pasi Hivinen. Pasi came to work for us back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Keen ornithologist, amateur. He did bird counts on Faroe Spit, but also he volunteered to do the heat maps for the bird distribution in New Zealand. So that's that book you see there. So I knew when I decided stupidly to volunteer to do banded dotterel stuff. Now the banded dotterel, I don't know if you know, has the same status as a blue duck and the giant spotted kiwi. So it's a endangered species. We're monitoring, as Miro, 4 areas. We've got the airport, Bering Head, Karangaha Lakes, and of course Eastbourne Foreshore. So Pasi in Edinburgh, Scotland, is where he's based now. I would talk to him in the morning, it's his evening, developed a handheld app to go out and do the nest monitoring, capture the nest, take a picture of it at the site. Because we've caught and banded like 300 birds now, we can know who's on those, so we actually capture that also. And then, I don't know if you know, but Bering Head, Greater Wellington did the bucket monitor for lizards. I was involved with the first lizard monitor at Bering. And it turned out the green dots and the orange dots, that's where the buckets are. Now they're like cookie time buckets. They're buried to the ground level. And what happens is you go and you open it up, you put a bit of moisture sponge in there, a bit of grass and stuff. You come back the next day and you look for any lizards that are there, gecko skinks. If you find one, you take a picture, you put a little dot on it, so you know you've already caught it, right? So they do that every 3 years, and of course, what's happening is we had a dotterel nest. then just a few meters of one of the buffer drops. So Rory, who's the GIS person in Greater Wellington, buffered the doctoral nest to make sure that the people doing, because these guys were out there monitoring every day, did not go close to the doctoral nest, which was great. And then one of the amazing things that I'm quite pleased about is with our doctorals. Our doctoral has the record for flying in New Caledonia, which is amazing, to go that way. So I had a call from the president of the ornithology of New Caledonia. He speaks French, I speak English, and it was a very interesting call. But we got there in the end. It was fantastic. This bird, PAP, used to nest with the same person, same female, same exact position every year. Within 10 meters of where he nested before. So we learned a lot about the habits. And 4 years in a row, he went back to the exact same place, which was an old shrimp farm in New Caledonia to feed, and he came all the way back. We didn't realize, but there's actually about 100 doctorals that go to New Caledonia every year. We don't know where the rest go. Unfortunately, PAPs, because they live about 8 to 10 years, he's passed on. But we do have a product, hopefully ZAC, one of his babies, will head back there, but we don't know. Now listen, the next slide is a subliminal slide, so if you don't want to have a subliminal thought, turn your heads now. You got it? Okay. Some of the other uses, so fish and game, they'll using UD Shankar's fresh rivers, they do floats down during trout counts, things like that. We've also done things like smart over trap NZ. We can do dashboarding because the GIS technology from ESRI is quite advanced, and they just don't have the tool sets to do this kind of stuff. So we put dashboards. This was the Nauru. These are the guys where the escarpment track is. This is well before the escarpment track, and these guys were like climbing these hills. They took me up there. I said, "This is dangerous," because it's right on those cliffs, and they were doing all the planting up there. And of course, then with Kim Olivier, the escarpment track, which is fantastic, it was opened up. We've also done a lot of work with iNaturalist, so we can pull the data out of iNaturalist easily and do all kinds of analysis on that. Then Wingspan, so if you know Wingspan's a group up in rural that look after the falcon and so forth, owls. And so we set up, they wanted to do a crowdsourcing, so wherever falcons are being seen in New Zealand, you can go to their site, pull down a little web thing we did, web form, put it in, and then your dots will be appearing. Of course, it seems like, I know in Eastbourne we've had very good success of nesting falcons. Another one's Guthrie Trust up in, this is up north in Napier. So this was donated, this whole house and everything was donated to the public. And there's a thing called story maps where you can tell a story about something. So we developed a system of story maps. And I've just got to say that this is Quentin Hagan, and he's been on the committee of GIC. Sorry. Quentin passed away. So we've developed a community award with Eagle Technology, the New Zealand Asia Group, and GIC. He was fantastic. He did the work for both Wingspan and Guthrie, and he wasn't just a candidate. We would say something in the committee meetings, and he would just do it. It's just fantastic. So now anybody can nominate a person in GIS as a special. Sorry. Another thing, we had a call from a guy up in Auckland who was taking his bike and looking for mothblades, of all things, which are nasty. We don't get them down here because it needs an environment up north. So he came to us with thousands of Google points. And so what do I do with this? So we were able to easily put that into the GIS system. And again, all they needed was a handheld phone because everything we host is up in the Amazon cloud. So there's no charge. We don't charge for any of this stuff. So we were able to easily do that. And what he would do is he would go look at it, find it, and then he would also go back and check it's been cleared. So it's very easy for him to do that on the phone. And then, so Raven, who's this next to me?
I don't know.
She was the acting CEO of Zealandia. So Sasha in the middle. Sasha was with the ESRI Conservation.
On the left.
Sorry?
Natasha's on the left.
Natasha, okay, that's who it is. I couldn't remember because I hosted. So Sasha was with the ESRI Conservation Program from the States. And he was hearing what we were doing with GIC. And so he came down for a visit. So I took him to both Zealandia and I took him to the Niwak Marai. And then he said, well, listen, you guys should become the New Zealand chapter of the Society for Conservation GIS. So we were confirmed as the SCGIS chapter. What SCGIS is, it's a worldwide system of all conservationists using GIS. So we get a feed from like Africa of tracing elephants, And here, what would happen was you can see the farmland. So if an elephant was starting to approach the farmland, these guys would go and push the elephant back. Now, this is the beginning of the actual batteries that these guys were wearing were probably about here up, because that's technology back in those days. But what that means is that we have a connection to worldwide people doing work in GIS, which is fantastic. And so we meet with them quarterly, and yeah, it's been a great thing. But the one thing that's really been handy is that we have a scholarship because of the ESRI GIS. It's worth about $10,000 US. And what it does is it lets you go to the ESRI conference, which now has over 20,000 attendees. You get to go to the USC GIS, the Society for Conservation Conference. You get 3 weeks of training and all lodging, food, and you get all your travel. So this year, it's between 12th of June and 7th of July. So these are some of our winners. Up in the top left is Marcus, middle Scott, Aria. By the way, Aria was the one who did the business requirements for Capital Kiwi. Sean, he did the Naitahu stuff. And then Kaio, unfortunately Kaio, he won the scholarship but then COVID hit. So he actually did all the courses and everything remotely for here in New Zealand. So it's kind of sad that he didn't actually get to go. And then this year, we have Maya Holman Rucker from Taranaki. So she's winning, so she'll be out to the ESRI conference and so forth, which is fantastic. So what happens is we put out the advertisements in about January, and then we get the people to put in their submissions, and then we pick who's going to vote, and they get to find out usually about into February, March, and then of course off they go. By the way, there will be people from Argentina, South Africa, Kenya, Botswana, Ukraine, Colombia, Rwanda, Cambodia, Indonesia, and Ghana at the conference with her. So she'll meet all these different people, which is fantastic. So it's been a great thing for us to have. So if you do know of anybody that might be, it's really about somebody who's just really starting with GIS in their journey, doing either First Nation work or conservation work. If they're really advanced in GIS, it's not worth it. So if you do know of anybody, just let me know. We can make sure they get the application next season. Thank you.
Well, listen, thank you, Parker, for that wonderful, wonderful lecture.
Is that 30 minutes?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
God.
Don't worry about it.
Sorry.
We do have a few minutes. I have a quick question about AI and how it may influence the evolution, the progress within GIS over the next few years. So we'll have hands up after that brief response.
So yeah, AI is taking a critical role now. You can basically go into the system and just say, I want a map showing these different data layers, instead of programming it at the nitty-gritty level, and it'll produce this map. So it's getting that smart now, which is kind of scary in some ways. So yeah, AI is definitely becoming very big in the GIS space.
Thank you. Hands up, please, ladies and gentlemen. Burning questions, observations, comments, things you want to get off your chest? Yes.
Miriam Pierce, a thank you and a question. Thank you for the GIS and conservation, because actually finding out who's in the catchment of the Kaifara stream was a challenge, so we've just been sponsored through that to a couple of volunteers. So hearing these other volunteers, I'm coming to talk to you about who else we can do the next stuff, because we're coming to question. You made it sound all quite nice and easy with getting data sets together, and we know the challenges are still ahead for that. What would be one or two things that you've seen, whether it's the conservation side or general public data, that you just wish was changed and more accessible? Was that changing following the AI question to be able to put things together more easily than before?
But it definitely the AI. So you can just say, I want this layer, so I want a base map of CRS, I want the TOBA data set, I want imagery of this area, and I want to put in the streets or whatever names and so forth, and that's the AI portion of it. But in terms of data sets at this point, there's not many that we're not using. You know, there are some very specific ones that are confidential, like Ravensdown ballots and those type of people, which we can't get access to. But the one push that Jack Dangerman and all the different vendors went through 10, 15 years ago was to get that data out there for just cost of supply, because people like me could have charged heaps for their freshwater streams. Yeah. So I'm not sure of any data set at this point that's really missing. We're very fortunate here.
Thank you very much, Parker. I was interested
to hear about the sort of the public good funding for geospatial data sets and how that has changed over time. So like New Zealand is one of the most open data environments. For certain GIS layers, it's honestly an exemplar across the world. But for others, speaking of which, along the lines of the NIWA costs around things like daily precipitation amounts, which are incredibly useful for research in terms of looking at flood extent modelling, which we've just recently been quoted as 10,000 to work with a PhD student to get that data. So what are your thoughts around like the sort of those kind of data sets, the ones that have moved over your career out of the public good into, you know, sort of user pays?
Yeah, no, and we really believe in get the data out there at no cost. But if there's a commercial situation, a commercial arm, it wasn't just us, it was all the different GIS vendors at the time that pushed that through Morris Williamson. So it was quite a bit of work to administer to really then change the rules at that level. We actually, Department of Conservation, pay LIMS $1 million for the data. It's crazy. I mean, it's already been captured, the taxpayers already paid for it. So that's what was our point to the government on why you should get this data out there first. Yeah. So now if there's certain data sets like that, I can't really help on that. Yeah.
We have time for one more question before I advertise our next lecture. One more question. Thank you.
Yeah, excuse me. I saw you talking about pest control in the weed department. Is there any kind of overall coordination and targeting certain weeds? Like I get in the bush a bit and I see them just randomly spraying. They spray after the seeds have gone, you know, when the plants have seeded. And so all they're doing basically is just doing the same thing every year and the plants are building up resistance. I think there's possibly scope for something being done in that respect of targeting certain weeds.
There's Kurt, so Simone here is with Greater Wellington, and he sits on the Miro committee with us for things like weed control. So we had horn poppy issues, and the horn poppy was growing in the area where the dotterels were nesting. Now, dotterels nest on the ground, and they need a clear view around them because their main predator was a blackback seagull. So if there's things around it, they'll disappear from that. So it's certainly very targeted weeding applications. I also had a Greater Wellington person come on my property looking for asparagus ferns, thanks very much, and saying that I, as the owner of the property, had to then clear that asparagus fern, right? So there is what I know, in terms of weeding, but we also get the Hut City. So in Eastbourne, if you know the area, there's a banded dotterel's nest just in front of the promenade out there. So Hut City, we actually put up a temporary fence. The dog walkers don't walk on nests, so people don't walk in the nest. And they're very good, but Hut City has the area that we actually nest in, and they spray that once a year to clear the weeds out. They're going to come back the next year. I think it's a matter of cost. And then I know Graham, who does the work on Petone, you're weeding that area, aren't you? Which has been great. That stopped all the sand coming across the road, the Petone foreshore, but it's constantly being weeded, eh? Yeah. Hold your head up, Graham, so you can see it. Yeah, so it's really, so we're controlled by Greater Wellington or Hut City in terms of what we're controlling. And even in the parks, it's huge areas. We got Northern Forest is 2,000 hectares. The New Collins Farm's 1,200 hectares. We got to figure out what's going to happen there. Lakes Block, Barren Head. There's not that much money.
Follow-up question with that one is, you mentioned iNaturalist and pulling that out, citizen science-wise, for people just identifying it. Is that still one of the key ways that anyone can spot a plant, pest or non-plant, and just put it in that's then useful for the conservation work?
It is. And
or is there anything better, I suppose?
Well, no, because iNaturalist is worldwide, so that's what we're standing on. And there is an app where you can take a picture or look at something and it'll tell you where it is. And to be honest, because we work with the guys on the committee, the scientists are waiting there for some weird thing to show up, and they're all rushing to identify that thing. So it's great. That's the main thing. You get a whole bunch of scientists behind there identifying.
Thank you so much.